David sat alone in his office, the city far below dissolving into soft ribbons of nightlight, his reflection caught in a glass as though some other version of him were staring back with a patience he could not match. He hadn't slept in days. Not truly, because every time he let his eyes close, he woke with impressions too vivid to be called dreams. Whispers carried on the rustle of bedsheets. A woman's hands moving in fluent silence across a table where no one sat. A baby's cry that turned into his own voice, saying things he swore he never said. The more he tried to trace the source of it, the more the shape of reality bent beneath him. The question was no longer what happened, but why? Why this moment? Why this collapse? Why him? Why now? And then came the thought that nearly drove him to the edge. What if the answer had nothing to do with the maid? Or the recordings? Or even his fractured memory? Michael Reynolds. That's the name you'll remember, though not for the reasons you think. Tonight, you carry something with you that feels heavier than a story, something closer to a wound you can explain. A piece of truth you were never meant to inherit. You're sitting here, listening, because somewhere deep down you already know? This is not coincidence, not rumor, not corporate gossip dressed up as mystery. It's the kind of thing you find buried in sealed folders or whispered in dim hallways. And once you've heard it, you'll never hear silence the same way again. It began in the most ordinary place, in the kind of glass-walled office tower that pretends to keep the world outside while hiding 100 secrets within. Michael was a CEO, polished in every way. The kind of man whose presence quieted a boardroom and whose signature shifted millions. He believed, like most men at that height, that the people moving silently around him existed only at the edges of his vision. The janitors after dark, the drivers waiting by the curb, the maids who pressed linens and poured coffee without ever daring to interrupt. But what if one of those shadows spoke in a language you thought belonged only to your private past? What if the person scrubbing your floors carried a truth about you no one else could know? The night it happened, no one was watching the cameras, no one listening for irregularities. Only Michael, alone in his penthouse office, startled as his maid Elise set down her mop and lifted her hands in silence. At first, he thought she was gesturing, fumbling to explain something. Then the movements sharpened. Precise, deliberate. She was signing fluently, effortlessly. The exact same language his late sister once used when she couldn't speak through her illness. A language he had not seen in years. A language he had never told a single soul belonged to him. His breath caught, because Elise signed not just words but sentences she should never have known, and one in particular that made his throat close. Asterisk, I remember the red door. That phrase should have been meaningless, but Michael froze, because he knew it wasn't. The red door was from his childhood, a place erased from records and buried under silence, a door no employee in his company could possibly name. He demanded to know how she learned it, who told her, but Elise didn't answer. She only smiled faintly, wiped her hands on her apron, and whispered something under her breath. He couldn't catch the sound. He couldn't even be sure it was real. But the moment the words left her lips, every monitor in the office flickered black. Every digital clock reset to 12 o'clock, and Elise was gone. Not walked out, not slipped past, security gone as if the air itself had swallowed her. By sunrise, the board arrived to find Michael seated not behind his desk, but across from it, staring at the leather chair where Elise now sat calmly waiting. Her hands folded, her eyes unblinking, as if she had been there all along. And when she finally spoke aloud, her voice clear, steady, and terribly familiar, it was not the voice of a maid. It was the voice Michael swore had been buried with his sister. Tell me, do you still want to know what she said next? Michael didn't move. Couldn't. The room felt carved from stone, the only sound his pulse hammering against his ear, a sound so loud it almost drowned out the impossible voice across from him. Illusaur, whoever she was, sat in his chair like she had been waiting there all her life. Her hands folded in her lap, her posture unnervingly calm, as if the entire night had been nothing more than a rehearsal. And when she repeated the words, slower this time, in his sister's voice, he knew something in him had broken. But the strangest thing, the part that clawed at him long after, wasn't what she said. It was that he couldn't remember the words 5 minutes later. He tried to repeat them to himself, even whispered them aloud in the dark corner of his office. But the phrase scattered every time, like static breaking through a half-tuned radio. His mind recoiled, pushed it away as if it wasn't safe to hold on to. All he knew was that the sound of it left him shaking, because buried inside the tone, there was something not just familiar, but personal, private, the kind of sound that belonged only in his nightmares. When his assistant came in at 8 that morning, the office looked untouched. No, Elise? No disturbance? The chair was empty, the desk in perfect order, as if nothing had happened, and yet the scent of bleach hung thick in the air, acrid, unmistakable. You okay, sir? The assistant asked carefully, noting his pale face, the way his fingers trembled around a pen. Michael forced a nod, but when she left, he caught a reflection in the glass wall of strange, delayed movement, her mouth still forming words after her real voice had stopped. He blinked, and it was gone. That was the first tear in the fabric. The second came when he reviewed the overnight security footage, desperate for proof. At 2:43 a.m. Elise appeared on the screen, mop in hand, her face shadowed, her movements ordinary. At 2:44, the feed stuttered 3 seconds of scrambled static, a low hum that sent needles of pain crawling through his skull. When the picture returned, Elise was gone. The clock jumped forward to 3:07 a.m., and there was Michael himself, alone, staring at his own reflection in the black glass of the window. But here's the part that hollowed him out. The reflection wasn't staring back. It blinked late, a beat behind, like it hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to follow him at all. By the second day, he stopped, trusting time. His phone logs showed calls he didn't remember making. One of his mother, dead 7 years. Another to a number he hadn't dialed since childhood, the line to the farmhouse. The one with the red door. He played the recordings back, hands shaking, and heard nothing but static at first. Then, under the hiss, a woman's breath, soft, close, as if she was leaning into the microphone. Asterisk, do you remember what you did? He slammed the phone down, but when he looked again, there was no record of the calls. His inbox, though, told another story. Unsent drafts, written in his own style, each one a half-finished confession, some addressed to his board, others to himself. One in particular made his vision blur. I let her die. Sleep abandoned him. Shadows thickened. He started hearing faint audio glitches whenever he was alone, voices folding into one another, like overlapping radio stations. Sometimes it was Elisa's whisper, other times the high-pitched laugh of his sister when she was small. But most often it was his own voice, low and trembling, asking questions he had never spoken aloud. It was then he made the mistake of telling someone her name was Angela. A company psychiatrist brought in years ago for executive wellness checks, though no one ever admitted to using her. She was sharp, composed, with a smile that cut through his paranoia just enough for him to risk it. He told her about Elise, about the signing, about the red door, and the voice. She didn't laugh. She didn't look surprised. She only tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing with an expression he couldn't read. "Michael!" she said softly. "Are you sure it wasn't you?" The question landed like a knife. She pressed further, but not in the way he expected. She didn't ask about stress or trauma or hallucinations. She asked about memory, about what he recalled before the company, before the wealth. About what he remembered of the farmhouse, the nights he swore never happened, the locked attic his father told him never to enter. And the more she asked, the less he trusted her, because her questions weren't casual, they were too precise, too familiar. Almost as if she wasn't diagnosing him at all, but testing him. The next morning, Angela left him a voicemail. Her voice was rushed, urgent. "Don't call me back from your office. Don't!" The line cut into static. Then, silence. When he tried to reach her, her number was disconnected. Her office was cleared out. HR swore she had never worked there. And yet, in the corner of his desk drawer, under a pile of old files, he found a cassette tape labeled in faint pencil, "Angela, Session 4. He didn't remember recording it. Didn't remember ever having a session for... But when he played it, he heard himself talking to, confessing in detail, a night by the red door, describing how someone screamed behind it, how he didn't open it, how he walked away. And the voice asking him questions wasn't Angela's at all. It was Elisa's. By then, Michael Deaton. To know if the walls of his office were closing in, or if he was finally seeing them for what they really were. The clocks reset themselves daily. His laptop typed words without his touch. And every morning, the leather chair across from his desk was slightly pulled back, as if someone had been sitting there, waiting. He started to realize the real question wasn't whether Elise existed, or whether his sister's voice had returned. The real question was whether any of this was happening outside of him at all, or if someone had been waiting for him to remember, and he had finally run out of ways to forget. And then, just as he felt himself spiraling past the point of return, an email appeared. No sender, no subject. Just 5 words. "Do you remember the attic?" Michael's breath froze in his chest, because he hadn't told anyone about the attic. Not Elise. Not Angela. Not a soul. And when he glanced at the reflection in the darkened window, it wasn't his face staring back anymore. It was Elisa's. "Would you like me to carry this?" Toward the asterisk, breaking point, asterisk, where Michael must decide if he confronts the attic of his memory or refuses to open it. That's where the paranoia and trauma could converge into the story's irreversible climax. Michael convinced himself he was close. That's how it always begins. The illusion of resolution, the fragile relief of believing the puzzle is finally within reach. After days of blurred time, of flickering screens and whispered phrases he couldn't repeat, he thought he had pieced together the hidden truth. It was the attic, of course. It was the attic. Every shadow pointed there, every half-arrest recording, every whisper of Elisa's hands in the air tracing words only he could understand. The attic was the origin, the wound, the place he had avoided his entire life. He told himself that if he could return, if he could walk through that red door and see what waited on the other side, everything would make sense. He even felt a strange calm, as though the universe itself wanted him to believe the mystery uncovered. The drive back to the farmhouse was suffocating in its familiarity. The roads he hadn't touched in decades bent themselves into the same cruel shapes. The same dips in the asphalt where water collected in storms. The same bent road sign pointing the wrong way. He had forgotten details until they emerged in front of him, sharp and undeniable. And yet, the deeper he drove, the more he wondered if he was really remembering Gore. If the road itself was rewriting him. His GPS glitched, repeating coordinates in a broken loop, and at one point his own voicemail began playing through the car speakers. His voice pleading, "Asterisk, don't come back here! Don't come back here!" Asterisk, he turned it off. He didn't want to hear his own warnings anymore. When he arrived, the house was smaller than memory had painted it, but not softer. The boards sagged, the paint peeled, the porch leaned forward like it was listening for him. But the red door, it hadn't aged. Not one chip in its paint. Not one crack in its wood. The color burned against the gray of the house like it had been painted yesterday, waiting for him. And for the first time since this all began, Michael thought he understood. Elise had only been a messenger. Angela had only been a mirror. The truth was here, behind that door. And if he had the courage to face it, the nightmares would end. He climbed the stairs slowly, each creak too loud, each shadow too deliberate. His hand hovered over the knob. He half expected a voice to stop him, but the silence was absolute. When he finally pushed it open, he braced himself for the scream he remembered, for the body he had sworn was trapped behind it. But the room was empty. Dust and rotted wood! Nothing more! And in that moment, he almost wept with relief. The false resolution settled over him like a blanket. He told himself he had been haunted by nothing but memory glitches, a mind eroded by guilt and childhood trauma. Elise hadn't vanished, she had quit. Angela wasn't arrested, she had resigned. The voices, the reflections, the impossible recordings, they were symptoms, not signals. He even whispered it aloud, "I'm not crazy, they lied to me! They made me believe something was here." And for a heartbeat, he believed it. The hidden truth wasn't supernatural. It was psychological, explainable. He was safe. But then, in the corner of the attic, he saw it. A small square of carpet pulled back, the wood beneath marked by scratches. His stomach turned. He knelt, fingers trembling, and pried the floorboard loose. Underneath was not a body, not bones, not the relic of a crime. It was a cassette tape, identical to the one labeled Angela, Session 4. This one read only, "Play me backwards." His relief fractured. He took the tape home, convinced it would be the key, the final piece. He borrowed an old player, pressed it down, and did as instructed. At first, it was nothing but warped sound, a dragging howl of reversed speech. But as it wound on, his chest locked. Because even backwards, he recognized the rhythm of the words was him speaking. And when the tape reached the middle, something snapped through clear as glass. A child's voice, not reversed, not distorted, calling his name. "Michael, don't let them in." His skin went cold. That voice was his own. The false resolution collapsed. He had found peace in the attic. He had only opened a door that was never meant to be touched again. And now the memory came, uninvited and merciless. He was 10 years old, crouched on the attic floor, clutching the same tape recorder. His sister was there, pale in the dim light, signing words he pretended not to understand. He remembered her looking at him with wide eyes, pleading. And he remembered the sound behind the doorknob, a scream, not human at all, something deeper, something that made the walls bend and the air taste like metal. He remembered pressing play. He remembered not turning it off. The more the memory sharpened, the more wrong the present felt. His apartment lights dimmed, though he hadn't touched the switch. His reflection in the window was no longer still. It was moving, slower than him, watching him like prey. The tape recorder, though unplugged, began to whine, the spools turning on their own. And behind the hiss, Elisa's voice returned, steady, deliberate, cruelly calm. It was never about the door. That was when he understood. He hadn't uncovered the mystery. He hadn't solved anything. He had played directly into its hands, given it permission, given it space. The attic hadn't been hiding the truth, it had been hiding him. And now, whatever had been watching since the beginning was no longer at a distance. It was here, in the air, in the wires, in the bones of his house. Michael fell to his knees, clutching his head, begging for silence. But the silence never came. Instead, the final detail unraveled. Everything on the back of the cassette tape. Faint, in pencil, written decades ago, in a child's hand, were the words, Session 1. And in that instant, he realized he hadn't been the witness all along. He had been the subject. Do you want me to continue the fourth chapter by pushing this deeper where Michael realizes every witness around him may have been part of the same recording, and the story folds back on itself like the audience has been watching a tape from the beginning. Michael thought for the longest time he was alone with the static and the empty chair, that the world had narrowed to the thin cone of light above his desk and the tape that kept whispering his name. Then the messages began arriving in ways a man of his means would insist are impossible, and envelope slipped under the door with no prints. And a single slip of paper folded 3 times. A postcard with the farmhouse photo on one side and on the other a symbol he could not place. 3 parallel scratches crossing a small circled dot drawn as if by a child who had learned to steady her hand on the edge of a blade. That was the first proof that something outside his head had noticed him. The second came in the dream that morning. The same dream played back to 3 people in 3 different cities. Samuel in Cleveland, who woke with his sheets soaked and a memory of signing the letters of his mother's name backwards. Jacob in Phoenix, who found, taped beneath his coffee table, a strip of film showing a hallway he had never walked and yet recognized. And Claire in Boston, who dreamt she was opening a bulletin board of photographs and found the same red door in every frame, each time in a different light, each time with a tiny handprint pressed into the paint. They did not know one another then. They did not yet know to look for the symbol. But when Claire, the only one among them who had the patience to write, posted a single blurred photograph on a message board with no caption and no account, the replies came like a tide. Yes, that symbol. Yes, found footage from 20 years ago. Yes, you were right all along. You feel it too, if you have been following the margins, the ache that something about the shape of your days is wrong. The quick double take. When a friend mentions a name you do not remember saying aloud, the private certainty that a portion of your life has been edited out. The conspiracy is not a set of men in rooms with files. It is a living grammar of omission. A set of rules that steals syllables from your speech so you will not ask the question that makes everything move. The others learned that the same way Michael did. Through the ache. Samuel found a voicemail on his father's old line. The audio, a grinding blend of his own childhood laughter and a voice speaking in the same sign language timing Elise used so effortlessly, as if someone had trained 2 mediums to the same cadence. Jacob discovered in a box of old tapes labeled Family Memories a fragment of film that showed Michael standing alone on the attic floor while something passed behind the attic door, a smear of motion that did not belong to light or shadow. Claire, who had paid attention to the way people flinch around certain photographs, received a packet by mail containing a matchbook-sized booklet of photocopied documents, and on the last page, a pencil sketch of the 3 scratches and a tiny circled dot. No return address! No name. Just a single typed line. If you want to find them, follow the marks where the clocks stop. The marks began to appear everywhere on the underside of coffee tables carved faintly into the wooden frame of playground benches, scratched into the metal of a subway handrail so delicately you could only see it if you turned the object toward the light. Someone had been leaving breadcrumbs, not for themselves, but for people who would wake up, people who would remember and then doubt, people who would then turn their doubt into a search. The shared dreams multiplied, and with them, the certainty that there were rules beyond the rules. In each dream, the same small anomaly occurred. A sound like film unspooling, then a breath, then the same voice. Elise's signing voice, Michael's sister's whisper. Some voice from a place you cannot find on a map saying a single sentence that could never be held in waking language. Because it moved like a ghost through the mouth. Asterisk? Do you remember the window? It asked. Or do you remember not opening it? And when someone woke up saying the words aloud, another message arrived in an untraceable email. Asterisk. Good. You are listening now. That is when the watchers stopped being abstract and became a network people existing in different counties through some invisible tether. Had the same bruise on their memory and the same symbol burning on their palms if they pressed too hard. The communication became more deliberate. As if the force behind it unseen, an unnamed had decided to recruit not only victims, but collaborators. Claire, who had begun to chronicle everything, received a photocopied page of a ledger dated decades earlier, columns of times and names and a tiny hand scribble in the margin. The scratches and the dot. Someone had been keeping track. Samuel woke to find a post-it on his bathroom mirror with only a single digit, 7. He did not know why it mattered until, that evening, he found underneath his doormat a Polaroid of his childhood living room with a clock stopped at 7 and a sliver of handwriting on the back. Remember the 7th minute? Jacob discovered a mailbox stuffed with VHS tapes that, when he brushed dust from a label, revealed the same handwriting. Asterisk play, when alone. The tapes were old, degraded, but within them were moments stitched together like diary entries, faces of strangers' hallways. A red door glimpsed for 2 frames, a child's hand over in the lower right corner, the 3 scratches briefly visible on a table leg. They looked like found footage from 20 years ago, and also like something that had been made yesterday for the sole purpose of being discovered. It would have been easier if there were a clearer enemy to name, because you can argue with a named thing. You can marshal evidence and demand accountability. You can call your lawyer or your senator and get a paper trail. But the force arrayed against them had learned a subtler cruelty. It did not live in one place, and it did not act like a person. It went through the seams of human relationships. It edited memory. It seeded doubt. It was content to let them find peas enough to make them feel clever, to give them the first small, intoxicating high of thinking they were close only to pull the rug when they were most secure. The messages grew more intimate. A grocery receipt with a circled item from a store you never enter. A voicemail of a lullaby sung in your own voice. An old friend texting a photograph of you as a child with your eyes scratched out in faint pencil. Each message was proof that you were not alone, and also proof that your life could be rearranged without your consent. And when Claire, responding to a provocation she did not understand, posted the symbol across a dozen forums with the caption, "You were right all along." There were replies in languages she did not speak, and time zones she had never heard. All of them recognizing the mark and answering with coordinates and a time. The network was global in its quietness. Then the third perspective began to speak, the observer, who may have been the only one telling the truth because her truth was not about what happened, but about how it was witnessed. Her name was Rebecca, a documentary editor who specialized in restoring degraded footage, and who had, by accident, stumbled across a cache of tapes at a municipal archive that had been labeled as evidence destroyed. She had the patience to look frame by frame and the bravery to listen to the hiss and find a rhythm. Rebecca did not approach the problem as a traumatized subject. She approached it as a technician who understood that what you did in TC was as loud as what you did. She started to leave notes in places only certain people would find on the back of Polaroids, within the metadata of image files, inside comments on private channels that vanished after an hour. Her messages were different. Not emotional pleas, but instructions precise and cold. Asterisk, do not play tapes in groups. Do not watch the red door at night. If you hear your name in reversed audio, stop immediately and write it down. To some, this felt like salvation. To others, an intrusion. Rebecca's truth was that the phenomenon required witnesses who would not become part of the patter people who could observe without being She believed, with a clarity that frightened her, that the way to fight it was to create a trusted chain of observation. A network of people who would archive rather than react, who would hold footage the way an archivist holds a brittle page. It should have been comforting someone, cataloging the cracks, issuing directives, offering a scaffolding of method. Instead, it felt like the beginning of an instruction manual for a trap. Because alongside Rebecca's notes came other things. A photograph of a classroom with every clock stopped at the same minute. A grocery list with names scribbled into the margins that matched the initials of the people who were now awake, and a sheet of microfilm with tiny handwriting that repeated a line over and over like a mantra. Asterisk, they LL, watch the watchers. Watch the watchers. Watch the watchers. Rebecca insisted it was a warning. Samuel called it proof of persecution. Jacob, who had always been close to violence, took it as proof that there was a hierarchy, structure and intelligence more patient than any human. Claire posted a cropped frame on a dark site with a caption, "What the government never released?" And the post exploded. Because it gave the idea of an institutional cover-up to something that refused to be People began to see patterns in places they had once thought safe. The government did not need to hide this because it could not define it. Those who looked too closely found that their own memories started to betray them like a poorly dubbed soundtrack. You are part of this now. If you've been following each post and replaying each frame and pausing to turn up the hiss until it hurts, the conspiracy has a feedback loop. Notice a mark. Follow it, and you will be marked by following. The Watchers are not satisfied with observation. They want multiplication. They want witnesses who carry their scratches forward like a contagion, who leave the symbol in the margins of everyday life, so that others will stumble and become aware and then unbearable. And yet, for all its reach, the force cannot completely control the human heart. In the corners of forums and the margins of social feeds, people began to leave gifts for one another, lists of safe words. Timestamps where nothing happens, coordinates that lead to empty fields and safe benches where you can sit and count the clouds. They formed a clandestine etiquette of survival. Do not speak the name you hear in reversed audio. Do not meet at the red door. Do not ever play back a tape labeled Session 1 more than once. These rituals were fragile and human, and perhaps the only defense against something that did not respect usual defenses. Rebecca's final public message before she disappeared was not dramatic. It was a single line in a thread nobody thought mattered. Asterisk, if you must watch, watch with friends you can trust and sign what you saw. We must leave marks for each other that are not theirs. That line practical pleading, like a librarian asking you to handle a book. With Carrie changed, the tenor of the network, people began to leave evidence for one another that could not be rewritten by the force. Handwritten notes, timestamps written in ink, photographs with a thumbprint in the corner. It was as if the act of human authentication ink skin, handwriting, created a small resistance. But the force adapted quickly. Within days, a new phenomenon appeared. Photos of those very notes, posted by unknown accounts with the symbol faintly visible beneath the handwriting. As if something could now forge not only memory, but the physical traces of proof. The Watchers were learning to counterfeit human certainties. The chapter ends not with answers, but with a map of possibilities and a single, impossible instruction that arrived at Michael S. inbox from an account he did not recognize. Asterisk, bring the red door a witness who has never seen it before. David sat alone in his office, the city far below dissolving into soft ribbons of nightlight, his reflection caught in the glass as though some other version of him were staring back with a patience he could not match. He hadn't slept in days. Not truly, because every time he let his eyes close, he woke with impressions too vivid to be called dreams. Whispers carried on the rustle of bed sheets. A woman's hands moving in fluent silence across a table where no one sat. A baby's cry that turned into his own voice, saying things he swore he never said. The more he tried to trace the source of it, the more the shape of reality bent beneath him. The question was no longer what happened, but why? Why this moment? Why this collapse? Why him? Why now? And then came the thought that nearly drove him to the edge. What if the answer had nothing to do with the maid? Or the recordings? Or even his fractured memory?